as part of our conversation series, speaking about aspects of the South Door and the Organ Project, which is phase one of the Wren Project at St. James's. There have been all sorts of people who are coming to St. James's and sharing their insights at various stages along the road in the project. And so, to begin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Unyimeabasi Udoh. I'm an artist and designer, and around this time last year I did an installation in the side chapel. I'm glad to be back here looking at monuments.
We are standing in the side chapel, and the side chapel in a way looks exactly the same because we really haven't done much with the east end of it. And in another way, it's really quite different because precisely where we're standing, there's this strange box, which is this temporary mystery zone where the workers are keeping their tools, and we can actually hear some activity in the background. There's definitely something being sawn, probably cutting up some stone. And we went out there earlier to take a look at whatever we could see, and we saw some cool stuff, and we also were able to acquire some cool stuff. So from your point of view, having seen the South Door Project for the first time as a work in progress today, what did you think? What did you see? And what happened?
Yeah, I mean, it was really cool to see the stone. I think they're building the architrave and the housing for the door itself, and they have stone that's been removed from the floor, stone that they've had to drill through from in order to install cables into the church for electricity and that kind of thing. And we were able to get a little bit of new stone, a little bit of old stone. So I am now a proud owner of a slab of marble. I think coming soon to a sculpture near you. It's really beautiful stone, and really seeing as someone who does not know how to carve stone, seeing the hand-carved stone that is about to be installed. They're just such elegant forms, and the craftsmanship is just incredible. It's very inspiring.
Yeah, these things, and I got some too, are fragments of a much bigger process across many different layers and generations, and in themselves as stone, at one point or another, they have been hewn out of rocks far away from here and then brought into the fabric of this building, whether just in the last few days or decades or even in some cases centuries ago. And at the minute, we are looking directly at the memorial to someone called Anne Boscawen. There are 5 memorials that used to be where the new South Door is being opened up now. And so they've been rehomed in different places around the church. So this one has only moved a couple of feet to the left, and it's now, therefore, in a different kind of conversation with a couple of different monuments on the walls. And one of the things that I know about your work, and that was certainly present in the installation that you did here, is that you're really interested in fonts, in letters, in the relationship between words and spaces. So with this monument in front of us, what do you make of it? And what is it telling us? And perhaps you'd like to read it out first so that for those who are listening, we know the content, if not the detail of the aesthetic quite yet of this memorial. What does it say?
Ooh, I'm terrible at reading aloud, but I will do my best. It's actually a real issue in my life.
Would you like me to read it instead?
Yeah, actually,
sure.
if you read it aloud.
Yeah, no worries. So it says, in memory of Anne Boscawen, daughter of the late General George and niece of the late Admiral Boscawen, she departed this life on the 14th of February, 1831, in her 86th year. 54 years of her life were spent in the honored service of the late Queen Charlotte. This tablet is erected by a grateful and affectionate friend who enjoyed in her society for 30 years a love like that of a parent. And the way that the memorial has been designed, it looks like it's on the side of a funerary object. So it's also kind of a micro thing, where something that would have been much bigger in the imagination of the maker to carry her body, her remains, it ends up being a monument where her remains are not here, but the monument references what the kind of container for her remains might have been. So it's an interesting shape. And what I want to know first is what you think of the lettering in relation to this object. If we take it as a sculpture with its content and its forms, what do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the first thing that actually like jumps out to me isn't the lettering by itself, but the full shape of it. I think unlike most of the other monuments around it, most of the other monuments that we've seen, it looks like it's composed of two different kinds of stone. There's sort of a dark stone, and then the lighter, and the backdrop that's a rectangle, and then a shaped sort of pentagonal, what Ayla was describing, what Reverend was describing as sort of sub-monument within this monument, with light stone. And so I think actually that the darker backing stone then makes the light stone stand out against the light wall, and then the text, it has a couple of layers of contrast because the text is filled, the engraved text is filled with a dark. I don't know actually how engravers do it. Is it pigment?
It often is pigment. Let's get closer. Let's take a good look at this. Be careful of the thing behind you. And so normally what happens, and it depends on the...
Or is it wood?
Yeah, no, this is stone as well. And it's held on with these little metal bits in order to keep it on the wall and keep it stable, partly because it's recently been moved.
Yeah.
And if we look closely, we can see that there's also this plaster layer because the top of it seems to have been disconnected as another piece from the bottom of it. So it's sort of it rests on this plinth, and it's got a little chip missing. So it's also showing its age, and it's showing that it's had at least 2 homes in the church so far. And we can also see its funny little feet, very classical looking little detail down here. And the way that the pigment works now, because this thing is so old, what I expect, and this makes sense, I think, you tell me what you think, is that it would have been filled in solid, and so it would have had way more contrast, and it's worn away in some places, especially on the date, this 14th, just here. And so the texture and the way in which the pigment kind of sat and perhaps even slightly pooled within these letters, it's really interesting to me. And as you sort of run your finger over them, and feel free, this isn't a museum or a gallery, we can touch it. There's a real sense of texture in this, even though from fairly far away, because of the pigmentation, it looks so flat. But it's not. Being a letter cutter, it's work. Have you ever worked in material where you are creating 3-dimensional letters in this way? Or is there something about the way that this is linked to your garlands project?
Yeah, so the closest I've come to letter cutting is probably lino cut, and linoleum is much, much more forgiving than marble. But I've witnessed other people letter cutting actually when I was at the RA for the Starr Fellowship. They were updating one of the donor panels in the foyer, and I was actually I'm proud to say that I offered a typographic suggestion to help. They had the donor's name was too long.
Oh my gosh. So it just wouldn't fit very well on the panel.
Wouldn't fit on the panel, and there was, it's already there, the names are carved and inlaid with gold.
Right.
And so they couldn't redo this whole panel. And so I am proud to say that I suggested an abbreviation of the estate of that made the whole panel work. So
how do you choose how an abbreviation will work? There are some conventions around here that we noticed, especially in early 19th century memorials like this one and memorials elsewhere, some of which are connected with this South Door dispersal, where the TH in 14th, it's got a little dot beneath it, and there's another one on the other side where a Y has a dot beneath it. So we get this sense both in shape and also in kind of signals with dots about when something's been shortened and why. So how did you do it when you were making that suggestion that they took on board?
Well, that one was based off of the other estates that were listed on the panel. So really all I did was notice that the one that they had didn't follow the convention that was already established. But it did help. And it was actually interesting looking at this one, because I realized I never actually answered the question of the type, which is that it's all caps serif, but it's not an especially, I would say, like Roman looking surface. It's actually fairly modern. It's very, and by modern I mean like typographically modern serifs, where they have very thin, like very high contrast. So you have these very thin strokes, which I'm impressed are still visible actually.
Yeah.
So they're hairline strokes, in contrast with rather wider strokes forming. So like letters like the N, the diagonal is much thicker than the two N's. And compared to some of the ones we've seen, no shade on the stone carvers and also the dead and also the people who commissioned their monuments. This one is very well laid out, very balanced, centered type. The lines, seem evenly. It gets a little bit tight at the bottom as the pentagon narrows, but the letters don't come too close to the margins. The centering is maintained, because there was a monument we saw on the other side of the south door where part of the text wasn't filled.
Yeah.
And it seems, I think it wasn't filled because it throws off the centering of the text. There is the word that was like, in this world, I think, or of this world.
Of this world, yeah.
That would run too far to the right. And this is actually something that happens to me, my secret shame, every time I write a birthday card, is that I can't keep the text like aligned properly.
So like the unforgiving limitations of the surface
Yeah.
and your desire to wish someone a happy birthday,
Yeah,
they kind of
exactly.
collide in the
They
composition.
collide.
And I like that idea, just as you've kind of brought it up almost by chance, as something
Yeah.
that you struggle with when you're writing, when you're wishing someone well.
Yeah.
Is that here, like in many of these monuments, we're looking at different sorts of dates and at being able to mark the turning point in these people's lives. And this one, I think, in terms of its dates and the description of Anne's life and who she was connected to, is, at least to me, reading this with my ADHD brain, quite topsy-turvy.
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, this is the date that she died. She was 86. And she spent 54 years.
We don't know which 54.
We don't know which 54, exactly. Towards the beginning of her life, towards the end.
In the middle?
In the middle. And then the tablet is not offered, is not erected, as is put here, by a member of her family, or even by Queen Charlotte, which would have been extraordinary, but possible, seeing as that, over half a century working with her and for her. But someone who describes this relationship that they had together as a love like that of a parent. So there are all of these different dates and moments and thresholds, and I wonder what you think about this monument and its description in relation to friendship and the way that these different kind of threshold moments were explored in this monument. There would have maybe been 30 birthday cards between these two women.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when I'm writing a birthday card, oftentimes they're handmade, and I'm writing the inscription after I've made the cover. And I really, now that I say this, I should start doing them the other way, so I like how the inside is, and then make the cover, so that I don't ruin the nice card by writing poorly on the interior. But a monument, especially like a stone monument, a marble monument, is a much more precious material than paper, and the care and the expense to have this made and to have it made well for a good friend, and also the humility not even to put your name on the monument, because many of the other monuments, they were erected by X in honor of Y. It's really extraordinary. And it's interesting thinking again about the monument on the other side of the door, about so often, these silly birthday cards, I'll just be a little bit upset about how they end up, but send them anyway. And if you raise that to the level of a stone monument that's going to go in a very public, very prestigious church for potentially centuries, the decision and whether you have the ability and the financial wherewithal to correct your mistakes, another question, you say, is it more important for this to be perfect or for it to be there?
Wow. Yeah.
I think it's really something to consider, especially in an age where these were like much harder. I think because even the modern one we saw for Kugano looks to be hand carved.
Yes. Yes.
But in an age where you can water jet text, so it's much easier now than it was then. The level of skill, the time it would take to make something really perfect, and the difficulty in redoing, and maybe you say, you know what, maybe we're just not going to fill this bit of text and hopefully no one will notice. Because you can imagine on the other monument, when the fill was darker, perhaps it was harder to see the unfilled text that threw off the composition.
Yeah, and this is a really powerful piece of work. And it's also, the more I look at it, there really is such variation in the color and the pigment that remains. And it's kind of fragmented in lots of different ways. When you speak about it in terms of perfection and imperfection, it reminds me that all art, and art in relation to memory, particularly perhaps where there's so much that's invested in it, it too is a sort of fragmentary attempt. It is a limited attempt. And what is not said in the context of a memorial like this one, that there are so many gaps. That seems to sit for me alongside the powerful story that is offered to us. And I don't know how many more monuments and memorials there are at St. James's that really underscore and amplify friendship, where we also don't have names associated with friends.
Though, actually, now looking at the names and looking at the type again, so the only two names on this monument are Anne's and Queen Charlotte's. And Anne's name is maybe double the size of the rest of the type. Her name and the Queen's name are on their own lines.
Oh, and we have General George.
Oh, no, there's General George, yes.
Her father.
But there are two women's names who have their own lines.
Yes.
Anne's and the Queen's, and Anne's is double the size of the Queen, and I think that's great. Good for
absolutely
her.
love that.
Good for her.
No, that's true, and it means that sort of Queen Charlotte down in the bottom, aesthetically, she's also quite compressed. She's sort of on her own with the most blank space, if I can put it that way, on either side. And after Anne's name, because of the way it reads, I suppose, we have a little comma, and then after Charlotte's name, we have this full stop, and I think that's fantastic. One of the other things that I always find very moving about this side chapel, and perhaps this is by way of conclusion as well, is that there's also a huge memorial which forms part of the furniture of the side chapel itself, the wood paneling, as well as this really big painting, to someone who was a teacher at the Royal Academy schools for decades.
Yeah, we did not overlap, I think.
You did not overlap, no.
But
and this guy, so it's in memory of Francis Ernest Jackson, ARA, so an associate of the Royal Academy, 1872 to 1945. The picture itself, monumental, is his own and painted in the 1920s, so I guess it was still in a studio when he died, described as a painter, lithographer, and teacher. And the Pietà paneling and altar given by his pupils and friends. So that parallel in friendship, which I hadn't really thought about until we started talking today, and the way that relates to the Royal Academy, that feels quite powerful for me in its way, that local friendship and the way that it generates so much art and so much beauty in these very different periods, that feels sort of powerful to me too. So I've got a final question for you, which is that we met when you were the Starr Fellow at the Royal Academy because there was a group show of some of the Royal Academy students. I wonder what you think about the connection between the Royal Academy and St. James's as the artists' church, what that means for you and what the resonances might be.
Well, I think this was my first, it's actually, I take it back. I was going to say this is my first opportunity to see secular art in a church, but that's actually not true. My first opportunity was at, now I'm waiting for, it's not also St. James, near Columbia University in New York, the cathedral.
Yeah, St. John.
St. John
the Divine.
Yeah, St. John the Divine.
Yeah.
Which also has an art program.
Yes.
But it feels much less approachable.
Oh, that's interesting.
because I mean, it feels more sort of capital I institutional. You go in and you see an installation. And it might just be because where I am in relation to the art institution has changed in my life, but they certainly weren't showing student shows.
I see, yeah.
Student shows there, and to see the students work here and just to witness this, I guess, dialogue across Piccadilly and to be part of that has been really meaningful. Make me think about my work differently, think about church differently, think about how the two can relate. And I'm very honored to have been an artist part of this artist's church.
And I keep inviting you back.
Yeah, and I keep saying yes.
And you keep saying yes. And today, absolutely delighted that you chose to say yes and that you chose to be part of this conversation unexpectedly too. Yeah. You're taking away a chunk of marble and a little bit of new Portland stone. So this relationship kind of continues and it fragments off in lots of unexpected directions. I'm so glad that you wanted to come and be part of this series today, and it feels apt that we are standing now just a few feet away from where your work was here just about a year ago, remembering someone else who was so deeply connected to the Royal Academy and thinking about the surprising insights that we get when we look really, really closely at these monuments from a font point of view, from a color point of view, and from a relationship point of view. So thank you for sharing your expertise.
Thank you for having me.